Roll Michael Leader. Exciting. You may now be seated.
Now we hear of trial of the defendant, and if he is guilty of first and second degree, and manslaughter. Is the prosecution ready?
Before the prosecution begins, Your Honor, we would like to draw the court's attention to the one and only stipulation that cannot be contested, which is that Meursault did kill the Arab. But other than that, we are ready to proceed as long as Your Honor is okay with the prosecution and the defense's use of the law throughout the trial.
Is the defense ready?
Yes.
Prosecution, you may bring up your first witness.
Before we call our witnesses, Your Honor, we would like to do our opening statement.
Opening, Your Honor. May I proceed, Your Honor? Meursault didn't care. Today, the defendant is charged with 2 counts. Count 1, killing done impulsively without premeditation but with malice aforethought. And count 2, killing results from an act that demonstrates the perpetrator's depraved indifference to human life. Today in court, the people will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed first-degree murder. You will hear today that he didn't care about his own mother's death, which demonstrates his lack of regard for human life. From the caretaker, you will hear that he drank coffee and smoked a cigarette during his mother's vigil, demonstrating his lack of respect. From Marie, you will hear the defendant slept with her, a woman he just met, the day after his mom died, showing that he didn't understand the significance of his mother's life. Meursault didn't care. From the defendant himself, you will hear that he was not even sad about his mother's death, which shows a lack of understanding. Testimony will show that Meursault was friends with Raymond Sintez, who was suspected of being a pimp. You will hear from his neighbor, Solomino, who daily beat his dog, that the defendant made no comment on this immoral behavior. You also hear from Marie, who will testify that the defendant was willing to marry her, even though he did not love her, thus corroborating the fact that he lacked an understanding of emotion. Based on his relationships and his lack of action, you will see that Meursault had a general disregard for the law, which is what prompted him to take Raymond's gun, shoot the Arab unprovoked, and shoot him four more times without the slightest remorse. You will hear the testimony showing that the defendant had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill the Arab. Means. You will hear that from Raymond Sintez that Meursault took the gun for him after the fight. Motive. Testimony from the defendant will show that he considered Raymond his pal. Since the Arab cut him with a knife, the defendant's motive was revenge for hurting his only friend. Opportunity. You will hear from 3 witnesses that the defendant was at the beach house on the day of the murder and that he went for a walk alone, giving him the perfect opportunity to kill the Arab. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at the end of this trial, we will ask for a verdict of guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt, of first-degree murder, because Meursault did not care. Thank you.
Your Honor, may I proceed with my opening statement? Ladies and gentlemen of the court, today I will be revealing to you the inner clockwork of my client, Meursault. Monsieur Meursault. You will see the characteristics of this man, a rational, relaxed, calm, and honorable man. You may see at times that he appears to be different than others, but in reality, he is only an individualist attempting to weave himself into the societal tapestry we've created. He is not detached from life, but alone, in a sea of fish swimming against the current, while he only sees the path that is straight ahead. He is not malice, but he has no hope. Now, is that indifference or self-concern? And are either against the law? Today you will witness the traits my client possesses, and how the impulsive and irrational decision to kill the Arab must have been caused by extraneous circumstance. For my client would never think as to perform such an impulsive decision. He is a rational man, as our witnesses will portray. A man who had already experienced the violently impulsive and cruel ways of the Arabs as he watched them slash his friend Raymond with a knife. You will see that the son forces him to act impulsively on these already negative feelings. He is the victim of circumstance, as was the Arab. He is the victim of some strengths causing him to pull the trigger. Now, he pulled the trigger 5 meaningless times, and yet that is not the worst part. Your Honor, my client felt no remorse. Not because remorse was not in his heart, but because he did not feel responsible for an action that he did not do. The son forced him to act. Now, Meursault may be guilty of needing medical assistance to his stress-related heat impulsiveness. But is he guilty of murder? Thank you.
At this time, Your Honor, we'll call the director to the stand.
Director, step forward. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give will consist of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I swear. You may have a seat.
Good afternoon, Director. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
I am the director of the home in Marengo. I have worked as the director for several years.
And what are your duties as director of the nursing home?
As director, I deal with the finances as well as the records of our tenants. I also deal with the relatives in time of need.
What, if anything, is your relationship to the defendant?
His mother, Madame Meursault, was brought to us years ago, and she has been a very kind woman until she passed recently. She was able to make quite a few friends and even began a relationship with one Tomas Perez.
Can you identify the defendant in court today?
Yes, the defendant, Monsieur Meursault, is sitting at the end of the defense counsel's court table wearing a blue blouse, blue jeans, and boots.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that this witness has correctly identified the defendant. Thank you. Have you seen the defendant recently?
Yes. The day after his mother passed, he came to the home for the vigil, and after sitting in for the overnight vigil, he joined us for the funeral at the local church.
And what did you observe about Meursault's behavior that day?
He was very cold and detached, as if he didn't seem to care.
And how did Meursault react at the mention of his dead mother?
He had no expression at all when I told him that his mother had passed. I expected crying, but got nothing in return. He was very quiet.
And when Madame Meursault, when did she first come to the nursing home?
She was brought to us 3 years ago.
And to the best of your knowledge, why did Meursault send his mother to the home?
She was brought to us because he was no longer able to provide the care that she had needed.
What, if anything, do you know about their relationship?
She always said that she had felt abandoned by her son.
Do you have knowledge of whether Meursault saw his mother's body?
I know that he did not want to see her body.
Do you know if the defendant had any sort of psychological disorder?
I don't know that information.
And do you know if the defendant had any sort of medical disorder?
No, I don't.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Defense may begin your cross-examination.
Did Meursault ever vocalize that he, quote, did not even care that she was dead, his mother?
He did not vocalize that to me.
Okay. If in this traumatic circumstance of a lost mother, Meursault did not break his cool demeanor, and what would cause him to have a sudden change of character and break his demeanor now as becomes sad when that is normally not his?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. This has no tendency or reason to prove whether Meursault killed the Arab in this case, Your Honor. Whether Meursault was sad when he saw his dead mother has no tendency or reason to prove whether he killed the Arab on that day.
May I respond?
You may.
This matter is relevant due to the fact that the Home Director states that Meursault could not break his cool demeanor in a situation of his mother's death. So we are only trying to obtain the information of whether he feels that situation would break this cool demeanor.
Well, Your Honor, then I move my objection to speculation, as this witness cannot testify to the defendant's state of mind.
May I respond? This is inaccurate due to the fact that we are not asking for an expert testimony, we are only asking for his personal opinion.
Exactly, Your Honor. As this is not an expert, you cannot ask this witness to testify as to what the defendant's state of mind was. This witness has no personal relationship with the defendant and therefore cannot testify to the defendant's state of mind.
May I further discuss this? In your opening statement, you mentioned that the prosecution mentioned that his cool demeanor and lack of remorse for humans is one of the reasons that shows that he did just murder the man in cold blood. Therefore, it is relevant that he discusses the man's remorse about humans.
While this may be true that we did mention this in our opening statement, Your Honor, it is still not admissible because it is speculative.
Objection sustained.
Move to strike any answer given, Your Honor. No?
Yes, right, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a standard as to how humans should grieve for a loved one?
The standard procedure for one's grieving process is normally tears, emotion, nothing that Meursault had shown that day, or at least to me personally.
Is there a certain standard that you base this off of?
Every person is different in their own way.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance. Whether a reasonable person would, whether there's a standard that a reasonable person would be sad at has no tendency or reason to prove whether this specific person, Meursault, was sad.
May I respond?
You may.
The Home Director states that what were we talking about? We're talking about, what was the question you objected to? Yes, okay. The Director states that he expected a certain grievance from our client, so we are only trying to discern whether or not where this expectation comes from and whether it is an accurate expectation or whether it is unfair.
But, Your Honor, that question is still irrelevant.
It will be relevant as long as that is one of the reasons that you are saying that he willingly murdered this man with zero remorse. As long as that remains part of the claim to why he is guilty of murder, then it will have relevance in the trial.
Your Honor, may I be heard? Whether or not Meursault did not care is not the actual charge that we are dealing with. The charge is that Meursault killed the Arab. So what we are dealing with in respect to remorse is just wait for this testimony.
I would like to state that the prosecution specifically identifies one of their claims as indifference to human life. Therefore, the relevance is in the fact that he is discussing whether or not Meursault is showing indifference to human life.
Yes,
So
Your Honor.
we are actually doing exactly what you are arguing, so it is exactly relevant.
But, Your Honor, the question itself is not, it does not have a tendency or reason to prove a material fact.
May you repeat the exact question you asked?
Is there a standard as to how humans should grieve for a loved one?
Objection overruled.
Director, is there a standard as to how humans should grieve for a loved one?
normal human grievance, including crying, bargaining, other such emotions, afraid of being left alone by a single loved one. Those types of emotions are normal to those that are home during times of vigil and times of burial.
Would it not be normal for a person to bottle up their emotions?
Most cases like that are under extreme shock after the sudden loss of a loved one, especially at the sudden news that Monsieur had received upon his mother's death.
So you're saying he could be in shock and therefore not express his emotions directly outward?
Your Honor, objection, counsel is testifying. There was no question asked.
Objection sustained.
Would you like any answer?
Yes.
Maybe rephrase?
Objection, Your Honor. Okay, though I have let this happen so far, opposing counsel is not allowed to use both attorneys to to respond to objections. Only the attorney that is crossing the witness can respond.
I object to that rule because this is class and we didn't know that before the meeting started.
That's why I'm clarifying, Your Honor.
It's a little late for that.
That is all your questioning. Thank you, Home Director.
May this witness please be excused?
Witness, you're excused.
Why do you want to watch it?
At this time, the people call the caretaker to the stand.
Here. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will contain the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Can you please identify yourself for the court?
I'm the caretaker at the old folks home in Marengo. I am 64 years old.
And what is your relationship with the defendant?
I've not personally known the defendant, but I was the caretaker of his mother, and I spent the day with him during the vigil of his mother.
And how long have you known the defendant?
The first and only time I met the defendant was when he came to visit the home in order to attend his late mother's funeral.
And what was Meursault's response when you asked if he wanted to see his mother?
He said that he did not wish to see his mother.
And what was his explanation for this?
When I asked him why he didn't want to see his mother, he simply responded, "I don't know."
And what was Meursault's response to your story about Paris?
He did not care about what I said. I had interviewed him about Paris. Vigil usually goes on for about 3 to 4 days, but that's much different than here because of the heat. It prevents us from having a vigil over an extended period of time.
And what, if anything, did the defendant do during the course of the vigil?
The defendant slept for most of the vigil. He also drank coffee and smoked a cigarette.
Did the defendant express any emotion?
The defendant did not. I did not see the defendant cry during the vigil, and he showed no emotion in regards to his mother's death.
And what is your opinion of the defendant?
It was very chilling to see the defendant not have any respect or show any emotion in regards to his mother's death.
And do you have any knowledge of what happened on the day of the murder?
I did not actually witness the murder.
Do you know if the defendant had any psychological disorders?
I do not.
Do you know if the defendant had any mental disorders?
I do not.
Attention may begin to cross-examination.
Caretaker. Does, when you drink coffee or take a smoke, have effects on your character?
Objection, Your Honor, improper character. You want me to explain?
Yeah.
There was no specific character trait identified by my opposing counsel Furthermore, this witness cannot be asked to speculate without any foundation on whether drinking coffee or lighting a cigarette would portray a specific character trait.
Objection sustained. Oh,
No, I'm sorry.
You mentioned asking about what Meursault did that day at the funeral, therefore his actions and the caretaker who witnessed his actions, opinions of his actions is relevant. And the caretaker did mention that his actions at the funeral were chilling, therefore it is relevant to his character.
Your Honor, I'm not objecting to relevance, I'm objecting to improper character.
objection sustained.
Move to strike.
Yes.
Would yes or no, do you expect those in grieving to grieve to your expectations?
Objection, Your Honor, being an individual.
You mentioned that his actions of detachment from his mother were chilling. What created his actions to be chilling in your opinion?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Or those actions to his mother chilling in the caretaker's opinion?
Exactly, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is asking for this witness to voice her speculation. And though we did ask about this on direct, opposing counsel did not object, and therefore, just because she does not agree does not mean that she can question all this.
Did you respond?
May I respond, Your Honor? We are not asking for speculation. We are asking for his opinion on how he perceived events. This has nothing to do with speculating on what Meursault is thinking. It only has to do with what he is thinking.
Your Honor, may I be heard? This witness's opinion is not based on anything within this witness's five senses, and therefore is speculation and cannot be admissible.
Objection, no. Okay, I had to rephrase the question. So, you describe Meursault as chilling. What characteristics did you observe in Meursault that created to have this chilling sense?
Your Honor, I have no objection to that question.
Thank you.
I'll be pretty sorry. When observing Meursault, you described him as chilling. What characteristics of Meursault caused you to give him the description of chilling?
When he went to see his, or when I took him to see where his mother was, he didn't seem to react. Usually when I bring individuals in to see their deceased relatives, they react, they tears, they're in shock, they can't speak, they stare, but he didn't seem to have any of those kinds of emotions.
Did Meursault actually see his dead mother?
He did not.
So his reaction was not directly looking at the mother, it was getting off away from his mother when you noticed these characteristics that were chilling at him.
Yes.
Okay. Is Meursault coming to say his goodbyes to his mother and attending the full funeral, would that be considered not enough for him to say his goodbyes and have his time of mourning, even though he did attend the vigil? Would that still be considered not enough mourning on your standard of what people should do when mourning for a lost one?
Yes, usually after the funeral, relatives stay and have their time with the deceased relative.
Objection, Your Honor, creation of material fact. Nowhere in the book or in this witness's statement does it indicate what usually occurs.
Did you respond?
I did not create what occurred, I just questioned what actually happened after the funeral.
Then, Your Honor, this calls for creation of material fact, which is also inadmissible.
Objection sustained.
Move to strike any answer.
Yes.
Thank you.
In our written statement, which we have right here of what happened, here, There is fact on what happened after the trial, and it was described as hot. In the book, would you describe it like as other guests as also being affected by the heat, or was it just Meursault?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance. There's no way that heat could have a tendency or reason to prove whether Meursault killed the Arab knowingly and willfully.
Man, in our argument, heat has a very big part in relevance of what can lead to it, lead to a man to cause a normally sane man to cause him to murder someone out of random when he's normally very calm, to cause him to snap and murder someone. Heat is very relevant in our argument.
Well, Your Honor, then I would ask opposing counsel to explain how he specifically provoked the defendant to kill the man.
Well, heat is a commonly known trigger of many disorders, and even if it is not a disorder, heat stroke is caused by obvious heat. And heat stroke is known to shut down brain functions and other situations, what causes you to lose thought process, or for your brain to completely shut down, or to lose control of your muscle and thought process. Also, heat-triggered bipolar disorder is a very common thing, and heat is a huge trigger of it. Meursault is normally a very calm and indifferent man, as stated by many witnesses of Meursault. And for him to suddenly lose character and murder someone would cause for a complete change in character, that his normal indifference, not caring so much about what's happening, for him to snap and all of a sudden be willing to murder someone would cause for a massive change in his thought process. So even if it is not bipolar disorder or heat stroke, there is something that is mentally going on with Meursault that is causing him to change his personality when in heat. And this is shown many times throughout the novel. It's been when he does kill the Arab, the heat is described as intensive and very heavy. And when the Arab pulls the knife first on Meursault, glaring the sun in him, the sun is just exaggerated, even more, causing Meursault to have a change in character and therefore lose it and kill the Arab. Also, in other situations, when he is walking at the funeral, when he's proceeding with his mother, it is even recognized as so hot that Thomas Perez faints because it is that hot and that intensive. And it's not only heat that causes him for this, but he also recognizes observations of people watching him and stressful situations to be very hot. And I can get full quotes for you exactly. That causes him to extremely heat up and change his normal calm demeanor.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Well, I'm sorry, one second. I'm gonna have to ask you to summarize that in one sentence.
Heat causes Meursault to switch from a calm, indifferent man to a primal, uncontrollable man who acts on instinct.
Your Honor, may I be heard? It is the people's contention that the defense has no evidence to actually prove that the defendant had any medical or psychological disorder, and therefore this cannot be taken as true. Though it may be true that reasonable people do get affected by heat, there's no evidence in this case that the defendant actually was, as he was not diagnosed with anything. And furthermore, Your Honor, some of the indicia that the defense related was that he observed people watching him in such heightened sense of reality. But all that proves is that the defendant was conscious when he made that decision to kill the Arab. And therefore this question must not be admissible.
In the novel, it is described when he is going through the thought process of shooting the Arab, the heat is described as overwhelming and causing his thought, and you can look at the exact quote. We can look up the exact quote, Your Honor, just take a few minutes. But he is described as overpowering, and when the knife glares in his face, which the Arab did pull first, it caused his brain to shut down, and I can look up the quote if you want.
Your Honor, may I be heard? This testimony can be saved for argument, but the question itself is not admissible as a question.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Can we restate the question, so?
Yeah,
I forgot what
Repeat
it
the
was.
original question.
Thank you. The relevance of he would ask, though. When you, were at the funeral, did you notice that it was only Meursault being affected by the heat, or were others affected as well?
I did not attend the funeral.
Individual.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
When you were at the vigil, when you were with Meursault, did you notice that others were affected by the heat, or was it solely Meursault?
No one else showed any problems.
Thank you.
And this, if there's any more further questions, then you have to discuss.
Your Honor, we have redirect.
You may read it.
Where was the vigil?
The vigil was at the mortuary at the local site
Was it inside or outside?
inside.
Why didn't he see his mother?
He did not give an explanation.
Objection, asked and answered.
Your Honor, asked and answered only refers to each individual set of questions by themselves. It does not apply to direct and then redirect, as redirect is for clarification.
Fair enough.
No further questions. May this witness please be excused. At this time, the people call Thomas Perez to the
We're at puberty.
Please identify yourself to the court.
I'm Thomas Perez, and I was very good friends with the defendant's mother in the nursing home.
How long have you known the defendant?
I've only seen him once at the funeral.
Could you please compare your behavior at the funeral with the behavior of the defendant?
I was very sad. I even fainted. Because I was so sad, I really did not get to see the defendant.
Do you know if the defendant had any sort of psychological disorder?
No.
Do you know if the defendant had any sort of medical disorder?
No.
No further questions.
You stated that you fainted, correct?
Correct.
What caused you to faint?
I was very sad.
Your Honor, I do not know how to respond due to the fact that that is inaccurate to medical things.
Your Honor, this is not necessarily inaccurate. Just because counsel doesn't like the response she was given doesn't mean that the response is not true. Opposing counsel asked my witness to create a material fact, and therefore any answer given is admissible.
Objection. In the novel, which is DSAC, Thomas Perez is said to have to repeat multiple times catch up to the coffin, being carried, and therefore he was exhausted and passed out due to heat and exhaustion. Not.
Your Honor, that is
inaccurate.
speculative. Can I justify whether it's speculative? It does not explicitly state anywhere within the fact pattern, which is the book, that Thomas Perez fainted due to heat. And as she was not diagnosed to any of our knowledge with heat stroke or anything heat related that could have caused her to faint, her testimony that she fainted due to heat is fair due to her subjective belief.
May I respond? I believe it is more accurate to say that somebody fainted from exhaustion due to the fact that we have in the book that he had to walk very long. He had to take a shortcut in order to make it there. I think that exhaustion is a much more viable reason for fainting than sadness.
Your Honor, it does not matter what opposing counsel thinks or believes, it only matters what happened, and as it does not say what happened, her answer is reasonable.
May I respond? I would say it is impossible to faint from sadness medically. Therefore, I do not believe it is speculative.
Well, unless counsel can prove that fact, we must move on, Your Honor.
May we use the Google? Because I'm pretty sure, because I am pretty sure that Google will say that people do not faint from being sad. But I would totally love to do that for you if
May
you
I
like.
read the correct statement? Big tears of frustration and exhaustion were streaming down his cheeks. That's describing Perez. And then in the next sentence, it says Perez faints. Therefore, in the previous sentence, it discusses exhaustion fainting, not sadness. It was due to frustration, not sadness.
Was this scene inside or outside?
Outside.
Your Honor, may I be heard? This would be what counsel is trying to do is create a reasonable inference. However, this inference is not reasonable, as a reasonable inference can only be taken as admissible if it is neutral or helps both sides. And as it does not help both sides, this statement is not admissible.
May I respond? I do not see any clear correlation of how it would detriment their case for Mr. Perez here to have fainted from exhaustion versus sadness.
Your
It
Honor.
doesn't seem like it has any real effect on what Meursault did at all.
Your Honor, may I be heard? The defense is basically asking for a reduced sentence, as we are asking for the death penalty. Based on the fact that this is an essential element to their case, it need not be detrimental to our case, but it does not help, or it helps their side more than it helps ours. Therefore, it is not a reasonable inference.
In actuality, whether Thomas or Perez fainted from sadness or heat does not really detriment or help my client. It only pertains to Mr. Perez, not my client.
Then, Your Honor, the question is irrelevant.
The question is relevant in the sense of the surroundings, what Mr. Perez was experiencing, and how it correlates from an average person to our client and how he experiences his perception of heat at the same moment.
Your Honor, may I be heard? This witness testified her experience, her subjective belief of what happened to her. And just because opposing counsel does not agree with this belief, that does not mean that it's not correct.
Yes. What caused you to faint? Was my question. Yes. Your Honor, does that seem logical?
Excuse me.
Your original objection to she was very sad, so she fainted.
No, she said that she didn't know how to respond to it, so I said that it was reasonable for her to say because she called for a creation of material fact. But I let it happen because I knew what she was going to do.
What was your final objection?
My objection? Well, because opposing counsel stated that it had nothing to do with the defendant. Therefore, the question itself is irrelevant.
Objection.
Move to strike any answer given. Thank you.
Was it hot outside? Did you experience this heat?
Yes.
Were you exhausted?
I was exhausted and also sad.
Does the heat outside cause you to lose any control over your actions, other than the actual act of fainting itself? Yes, I can rephrase it.
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation.
That's fine. I'll just not say that.
Okay. Move to strike any answer given to that question.
All right.
I know, a little bit. Order. Order.
So, you caught, you were exhausted,
Asked and answered.
I was, how do you say, reviewing.
Then Your Honor, counsel is testifying.
That's no problem, I'll just keep going. All right, so you know where we were, right? All right. So, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. Were you in full control of your mind at this time?
I was very sad. So, I think sadness can affect my brain.
I'll leave it there. No more questions,
Thank you.
No problem.
Any further questions for Mr. Grace?
Yes, Your Honor.
What effect did your mind? What affected your mind state? Heat or sadness?
Well, the defendant's mother had died, and I was very close friends with her, so that affected me deeply.
No further questions, may this witness please be excused.
At this time, the people call the magistrate to the stand.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give, you will contain the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I swear.
Good afternoon, Mr. Magistrate.
Good afternoon.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes. I am the magistrate of